Welcome back to PLN 0006 Introduction to Language. This week we were looking at how animal communication systems are similar or dissimilar to human language. There'll be two videos. In the first video we were looking at some of the fundamental design features of human language, and we'll be exploring to what degree some of these features might be shared with other species and to what degrees some of these features might not be shared or might be different in other species. Then in the second video, we'll be asking how the cognitive and learning abilities of various animals compare to the claim that they might be approaching some sort of linguistic ability. One of the core properties that sets human language apart from many other communication systems is what Ferdinand de Saussure called the arbitrariness of the signal. Arbitrariness of the signal means that the relation between the signal and its signification, namely that what it signifies, is unmotivated. So in essence, what this means is that I have a choice, a voluntary choice over what I choose to use to signify something in the world that I want to refer to, perhaps a concept or a concrete thing, perhaps a dog. If I want to refer to a dog, then, well, in English I can use the word dog, in German I could use the word hund, or in Welsh I could use the word key, for example. In comparison, if I want to refer to a plurality of dogs, in English, well, of course, I stick the suffix s on there and I get dogs. In German, I stick the suffix e on there and I get hunde. And then in Welsh, I change the root actually and I get koen as the plural of key. So in both these cases, we see first of all that we can label one object with different labels depending on the language that we speak. And then that also to signify something that is purely grammatical, in this case plural marking, we can likewise make an arbitrary choice based on the language. We can, for example, put different morphemes on the end to signify plurality, such as the plural s in English or the plural e in German, or we can indeed apply root suppletion and use a different word to signify the plural of that entity. Another important feature that we've already encountered in this course is displacement. Displacement means that we can talk about things and situations in the world that are not in the here and now. For example, if I tell you that my parents are going to buy a dog that will be called Cusco, then this sentence is speculating about what the world will be like in the future, so clearly I'm not talking about the world at present. Therefore, this is applying the principle of displacement. Similarly, I can talk about things that are clearly not true. For example, I could say, there are unicorns waiting for you outside the room. Clearly, this is not the case because, sadly, unicorns don't exist. However, nonetheless, I can speak that, nonetheless, you can understand it, and we both can derive the meaning because we have this ability to figure out what the world would have to be like for that sentence to be true. This is something that doesn't feature in a lot of other communication systems. Now, another property that we've already explored in some depth is, of course, recursion. Knock, knock. Who's there? Recursion. Recursion who? Knock, knock. Recursion is the ability to place an alpha inside another alpha. For instance, we can put a sentence inside another sentence, and I can say things like the earth is round and put that in another sentence and say Galileo said that the earth is round, and I can put that in another sentence and say her teacher said that Galileo said that the earth is round, and once again I can put that into another sentence and say my mum said that her teacher said that Galileo said that the earth is round. And of course, as you know, if you wanted to, you could just keep going, embedding the sentence into another sentence and another sentence and another sentence until we all get super mighty tired of it. Now, of course, a feature that is intimately tied to displacement and recursion is productivity. Productivity refers to the fact that we can produce, understand, and judge novel sentences. That is, sentences that we have never heard before. For example, I can produce a sentence such as, the cat that Einstein imagined floating around a black hole was wearing a dark spacesuit and a pair of brown leather brogues. This is an example of a sentence that is unlikely to have been produced by some speaker before me and is also unlikely to have been heard by you before I spoke it just now. Now, compare this to a sentence like, what kind of boots was the cat Einstein imagined floating around a black hole was wearing a dark spacesuit and... Clearly, even though this is a novel sentence in the same way, even though this is a sentence that uses the same words and perhaps we can say is novel to you in the same way that the prior sentence was, you immediately are able to judge the sentence as ungrammatical. So this also illustrates your ability to judge novel sentences. Now, if you've been following this course from the start and you've been paying at least a slight bit of attention throughout, then you'll of course be well aware that we've been spending a huge amount of time trying to account for the combinatorial possibilities of the discrete units that language is made up of. Therefore, one of the key properties of language, of course, is discreteness. Discreteness refers to the fact that a linguistic signal is subdividable into separate units. For example, phonemes, syllables, words, phrases, sentences, and so on. For example, if we take just the three sounds p, a, and t, then in English we can make a number of words by combining them in different orders and perhaps with different repetition. For example, I can just use a, an expression of surprise. I can refer to my father as papa. I can refer to this video as a part in the series. I can say ta for overlooking the many jump cuts that I make in my videos, and I can of course refer to the tap that I have in my bathroom to wash my hands in, something that is of course very important in the corona times that we live in now. Now, these are all properties of human language that we've encountered throughout this course already, and so we know they're quite important for human language, and some of them perhaps might be unique to human language in fact. But if we continue that question of what sort of design features does human language have that make human language possible at all, then there are a couple more that we can consider. Charles Hockett, who was a linguist who was active mainly in the middle of the last century, was very interested in this issue, and he came up with 13 design features of human language. So let's have a quick look at them. The first of Hockett's design features is the Vocal-Auditory Channel. So usually human language is transmitted by one person speaking and one person listening. However, we've already seen that, for example, in sign languages, there is a different modality of transmission. There we have a manual visual challenge going from the hands to the eyes. And there's also what we call a tactile transmission medium. For example, deafblind people will use a form of sign language that involves touching the other person to feel what they are doing. The second design feature, according to Hockett, is broadcast transmission and directional reception. So this refers to the fact that when someone speaks in human language, usually they're broadcasting not just perhaps to one person individually, but if there are more people, anyone who is within the area where they can hear the sound waves will be able to receive that signal. Similarly, when I use sign language, anyone who is in the line of sight will be able to see what I'm communicating. So whenever I'm communicating, I'm broadcasting what I'm doing to the audience around me. And in turn, when I'm an audience member and I listen to someone, then I can hear where they're speaking from, or I can see them if I can see and read their signs. The third design feature of human language that Hockett talks about is rapid fading, the fact that auditory signals degrade very, very quickly. So as soon as I speak something, a sound wave comes out, it's transmitted, and if you miss it and you're a second too late, then the sound wave is gone and the signal is gone. You can't get and recover the message that I've conveyed. The same, of course, applies again to sign languages. Once I've made my manual sign and the speed of light has passed you, then you're done with that. You can't recover a message that you have missed in that moment. The fourth feature is interchangeability, the fact that you can produce any sentence that any other member of the species can produce. Anything that is a possible sentence in a language that you know at least, you can produce. There's no biological limitation that restricts, for example, males from producing sounds that have a high pitch or some such thing, or that restrict the domain that you can talk about based on some biological feature that you have. The fifth feature is total feedback. Total feedback refers to the fact that I can hear what I'm saying as I'm saying it, and I can monitor my speech, and I can also understand what I am saying myself. That is not, as it turns out, a given for all communication systems in the world. Similarly, again, with sign language speakers, if you make signs, you have proprioception. You can figure out where your hands are in space and what's going on. You can also, a lot of the time, see what you're doing yourself. So there we also have total feedback. The sixth design feature of human language, according to Hockett, is specialization. That means that language seems to be designed specifically for the purpose of communication. That is not the case with all sorts of signals that lend themselves to communication and that are often used for communication in other species. For example, if a dog pants, then they're communicating to some extent that they're thirsty, perhaps. However, they're panting out of a biological response to cool themselves down, not to primarily communicate that they're thirsty. That's just a side effect. That's not how language is. Language is made specifically for the act of communication. Feature number 7 is semanticity. The fact that the signal that we choose, whether that be sound or sign or something else, is inherently tied to some meaning. So that's what we explored in the first lecture on semantics some time ago. We have a specific mapping between signal and meaning, and we can also combine these meanings to create larger meanings. That is semanticity. Feature number 8 we've explored at the very start of this lecture, arbitrariness. We can use different labels to refer to the same thing. So whether I call this thing here a dog or hund or key is up to the language I speak. It's essentially arbitrary. Hockett's 9th feature is discreteness, the fact that we can break down the signal into smaller parts, whether they be meaningful or not, something that will come to matter farther down the line. Feature number 10 is displacement. So the fact that we can talk about things that are not present in the here and now, or perhaps that aren't real at all. So anytime I express an if clause, if X were true, then Y, I'm by necessity talking about something that doesn't exist and therefore using displacement. That is something that animals, as far as we know, can't do. Feature number 11 is what Hockett calls productivity and what we have come to know as creativity, the fact that we can produce and understand novel sentences with novel meanings. Feature number 12 is traditional transmission. So this refers to the fact that at least part of our linguistic knowledge is imparted by the people around us, so is transmitted to us by our culture and our community of speakers. For example, the different kinds of words that we have in our language to refer to things like dogs and cats. And finally, the 13th of Hockett's features is the duality of patterning. The duality of patterning refers to the fact that we have arbitrary discrete symbols that are combined to create meaningful utterances on different levels. So, for example, sentences which are meaningful units are made up of units that are called words, which are themselves discrete meaningful units, and themselves can be made up of smaller discrete meaningful units, morphemes, and these in turn consist of smaller meaningless units called phonemes. So we have these different layers of discrete units combining to create meaning from units at the bottom that are combining that are ultimately meaningless. This is what we know as the duality of patterning. Now, as you might have already thought yourself whilst we were iterating through these features, many of these features are not unique to humans by all means. For example, the Vocal-Auditory Channel is shared by most animal communication systems. However, what is claimed to be unique to humans is the combination of all these 13 features. So the claim that Hockett essentially is making here is that no other species on the planet has a combination of these 13 features in their system. And that is what makes humans unique, the combination of these 13 design features. So let's have a look at just 3 of those features that we have seen are especially important for human language: displacement, discreteness, and recursion, and how they may or may not pop up in some other animal communication systems. So the first animal communication system that we'll be taking a look at is the dance of the honeybee, which is an example of displacement in a non-human species. So it turns out, under appropriate conditions, the honeybee performs dances, and these dances have a small set of parameters that they can follow. So when the bee arrives in the hive, then it dances and it can turn right or away from the sun, and it can turn towards where the sun is. So the movements are all relative to the sun, and on the little path that it dances here, it can sort of waggle its tail, and it can do that more intently or it can do that less intensely. So these parameters characterize the location and the quality of a food source such as pollen or nectar, or also of a potential nesting site which is something that they have to find about once a year when the hive gets too big and they're splitting up and swarming out to start a new tribe somewhere. And so to indicate that information, the parameters then of course relate to the distance, the direction, and the quality of the recently visited food source or nesting site. So here's a quick example of what the dance of the honeybee looks like. So this dance of the honeybee is of course produced back in the hive after they've returned from their journey to the food source or to the new nesting site. Therefore, by definition, this involves displacement. They're talking about something that is not in the here and now, as it were, even though time, of course, does play a critical role, but this can be several kilometers away from the site, so even that with a bee's flying speed is some time and some place removed. Now, another thing that is very interesting that you can notice about this communication method of the honeybee dance is that it indicates that both humans and honeybees can essentially say an unlimited number of things or convey an unlimited number of messages. In the case of the honeybee, depending on how they vary the parameters, they can indicate an unlimited number of messages relating to where some food source is and how good it is. However, in other ways, the honeybee communication system is quite different from that of a human. So humans, on the one hand, have a combinatorial system where different units are combined in different ways to create novel meanings. So if I say bird likes Mary, that is a different sentence from saying Mary likes bird, and I can use the discreteness of the signal to build new messages. This is something that is not possible in honeybee dance. Honeybee dance involves combining discrete elements in a fixed sequence. For example, waggle your tail, and then you have a choice, turn towards the sun or away from the sun. Waggle your tail, then you have the choice again, turn towards the sun or away from the sun. So this is significantly different from humans in two ways. First of all, the signal is not arbitrary in the sense that it's biologically hardwired what sequence of signals must be given and what the parameters of those signals are. Then secondly, it's different from human syntax in that the ordering is not free, and different ordering of these units relative to one another cannot be used to signify differences in meaning. So that's what we had just in these sentences, bird likes Mary and Mary likes bird. The second animal communication system that I want to have a look at here are the calls of the putty-nosed monkey, which have been claimed to exhibit the current evolving of discreteness. So the putty-nosed monkey has two types of calls, which are known as a piao call and a hack call. A piao call is used when there's danger from the ground. For example, there's a leopard below the tree, and the hack call is used when there's danger from above. For example, if there's an eagle who could snatch away one of the putty-nosed monkeys from the crown of a tree. So essentially, if you hear the piao call, that means, well, advance up into the tree, into the crown, or go out on the limbs of the tree so a predator can't get to you. And if you hear the hack call, that means, well, go towards the inside of the tree where a flying predator can't get and try and stay away from the crown of the tree. So to give you an idea of what these calls sound like, here is a quick recording, first of a piao call and then of a hack call. So piao sounds like this. And hack sounds like this. Now, a really interesting observation that was made by Arnold and Superbühler is that when they observed various groups of these putty-nosed monkeys in the wild, sometimes the males seemed to make a combination of a piao and a hack call. And then they did some experiments and they figured out that when the piao and the hack call are combined in this way, this leads the group to move on more quickly. So here's a recording of what this piao-hack combination sounds like. So as you can hear, there are a number of piao calls followed by a number of hack calls in this scenario. And perhaps you can have a guess at why this call should be used to initiate movement of the group. Well, if there's a situation where you're in a certain area and there's danger from above and below and you have nowhere left to go, then perhaps the wisest solution is to move on. And indeed, when they did some observations and they did even some manipulations where they played back recordings of various predators to kind of induce these calls, they found that in some groups these combinations occur and in other groups they don't. So there seems to be something that is forming, becoming part of the culture, as it were, in certain groups, developing this new combined call. And they also observed that sometimes this call is used out of context, so there might not even be a predator, but some members of the group might just want the group to move on, and so they use the combination of this Piao hack call. Now, of course, this is qualitatively far away from the kind of discreteness that we find, for example, in human language. Nonetheless, it's really interesting to think that if putty-nosed monkeys are currently evolving this ability to combine two discrete units to convey a new message, that perhaps there is that ability in the biology of other primates that underlies our ability of discreteness. Now, the last example that I want to look at is the song of the starling. So Birdsong is quite well known to have some sort of grammar behind it. There are some sort of rules about what goes and what doesn't. And it's been argued in an experiment that starlings are able to learn some type of recursive grammar. So what Gentner and colleagues have done is they've tried to teach starlings two types of recursive grammars. The first of them is an A to the N, B to the N grammar. So that's something that can produce sequences of equal numbers of A's followed by equal numbers of B's. For example, AABB is fine, AAABBB is fine, and so on. However, something like AABBB is not fine, where we have 3 versus 2, because that doesn't conform to the fact that N has to be the same. The second type of grammar that they tried to teach the starlings is an AB to the N grammar. So this is one where the sequence AB has to repeat N times. So AB, AB is fine, AB, AB, AB is fine, and so on. However, something like ABBA would not be fine. That's not covered by this grammar. So what they've done then is to expose starlings to these two types of different grammars, and they've trained the birds to distinguish between them. And on one mark they were quite successful. So 9 out of the 11 starlings were able to discriminate between these two types of artificial song in the end. However, they took somewhere between 10 and 50,000 repetitions to learn the difference between these two grammars, which is a lot more than you might perhaps expect of an infant that you're doing the same experiment with. So what they mean by this 9 out of 11 success rate anyways is that they've played these starlings novel songs, so songs that they haven't heard during the training phase, and 9 of them performed above chance, and they also reacted differently to songs that were ungrammatical. And I leave it up to you to judge whether the qualification of performing just above chance is really comparable to what humans do when they acquire language, or to the language acquisition ability of an infant. Now, to get a better idea of the kinds of songs that we're talking about here in this training and the kinds of repetitions that we're talking about, let's have a listen to some examples. Let's start with a quick listen to a natural song of the starling, and you might be able to discern that there are two types of different chirps. There's sort of like a high frequency quick flutter, and then there's a more stretched out warpy chirp. That's the only way I can describe it, but have a listen for yourself and I'm sure you'll be able to make out the two different units. So here is a natural song sung by a starling. And now have a listen to the A to the N, B to the N type song. So remember, this is a song of the form AA, B, B. So you can quite clearly make out here a sequence of 2 of these more fluttery chirps and then 2 of the more stretched out, more pronounced chirps. Now finally we have an AB to the N song. So this was a song of the form AB, AB, using the same stimuli. Now this seems pretty cool, right? Even though they might perhaps need a lot of repetitions to learn this, and even though perhaps they only perform above chance by a few %, that is nonetheless a pretty cool ability. They can distinguish these two types of songs, and they can tell when these songs are ungrammatical. However, a further qualification that we have to make is that they can only do this for numbers of repetitions for n equal or smaller to 4. So as soon as I produce a song like AB, 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 AB that has 5 repetitions, so 10 items in total, they can't keep track of it and they can't tell whether it's grammatical or ungrammatical anymore. So that is a further big limitation in this kind of study, and this is of course fundamentally different from human grammar, where recursion is the very thing that enables us to produce and understand and judge infinitely long sentences. There are also some newer results that show that the birds can't extend their grammar to new sounds, so when they learn that grammar with a specific type of sound taken from their birdsong, then they have to stick with that. As soon as you switch up the sounds, they lose their ability or what they've learned about that song, and you have to retrain them on the novel sound, as it were. So that is also fundamentally different from how recursion or syntax works in humans, where the structure is sort of independent of whatever units that I fill that with. I have the slots there, I have to put a noun here and a verb there and whatever. But once I know those rules of how they can combine, I can put different verbs in there, I can put different nouns in there, different adjectives in there. That's something that Starling doesn't seem to be able to do, so they can't generalize away from the concrete units that are here. So to summarize what we've seen today, well, first of all, we've seen that animal communication systems have many of the features that human language has. However, the full set of design features of human language is only found in humans. Other animals, while they might have some of these design features in their communication systems, don't have the fully fledged combination of the 13 features as it is found in human language. We've also seen that even if we accept the evidence from the Putty-nosed monkey and from the starling that animal communication systems can be built on discreteness and can implement recursion, then the use of these features in humans seems to be much more generalized than in many animals. So many animals that seem to be able to do some of these things are much more limited in the range of applications and the range of parameters that they can apply to that. Now, on the other hand, some of the design features of human language may not have an analog in animals at all. For example, true recursion allows for something that we call center embedding. Center embedding is something that allows me to produce grammatical sentence like police, 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 and the horse raced past the barn fell, where I put another clause inside of a bigger clause. These two, by the way, being cool examples of what's called garden pathing. So following on from this, in the second video on animal communication this week, we'll be taking a look at some of the underlying differences in the learning and cognitive abilities between humans and some other animals to see what sort of difference might be giving rise here to the different abilities of humans and other animals in the domain of linguistically relevant design features.